When the million-dollar engine stopped working, even the top engineers were stumped. But then, a girl stepped out from the corner of the room. No name tag, no title, just the janitor's daughter. The CEO laughed mockingly. "If you're so smart, go ahead and fix it." And just minutes later, what she uncovered left the entire company speechless. No one expected. She didn't just fix the machine, she exposed a secret that shook the whole corporation. Ava Jefferson hated tagging along with her dad to work. Not because she was embarrassed, but because at Orion Motors, everyone only saw him as the old janitor. No one knew he used to be a seasoned mechanic, once standing on stage to receive a patent award, until her mom died in a factory explosion. After that, he chose a quiet life, sweeping floors to raise Ava on his own. Today was Family Day at Orion, a symbolic event where lower-level employees could bring their kids to tour the facility. Ava, who had a deep passion for mechanical propulsion, reluctantly agreed to come. She had no intention of drawing attention, just stood quietly, hands in her coat pockets, watching the electric engines being tested through the safety glass. That's when the alarm blared. A team of senior engineers rushed into Engine Room 7 in a panic. Ava watched them gather around a prototype motor, one Orion was about to unveil as a historic breakthrough. But clearly, something had gone very wrong. The high-pitched screech of metal filled the air, and a wisp of smoke curled from the machine's casing. One engineer whispered, "If we can't fix this, the funding gets pulled." Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Douglas Price, the legendary CEO of Orion, entered with a face like steel. He scanned the room, then growled, "What is this? 12 of you and no one can fix a simple short circuit?" A young engineer stammered, "We suspect a microchip conflict in the cooling system during torque mode transition, but we haven't pinpointed the cause yet." Ava, driven by some inexplicable force, spoke up softly. "Maybe the problem isn't in the circuitry, but in a grounding misalignment within the auxiliary module caused by incorrect scaling in the secondary blueprint." The entire room turned to stare at her. The CEO narrowed his eyes. "And you are?" Ralph rushed forward, shielding his daughter. "Sir, this is Ava, my daughter. She's just here for the tour." Douglas smirked. "Ah, the janitor's daughter. Impressive talk. All right then, if you're so smart, go ahead and fix that misaligned engine." The air went still. Ava looked at her father. His eyes were full of worry. But then she stepped forward, pulled goggles from her collar, and put them on. "I'll give it a try. If I'm wrong, you can keep laughing. But if I'm right, I ask just one thing." Douglas crossed his arms. "What's the deal?" She met his gaze. "Treat me like a real engineer, not the janitor's kid." The entire factory fell silent. No one noticed it, but Douglas's hand clenched slightly. So he hadn't realized that his challenge would trigger a chain of events that would change Orion Motors forever. Ava stepped up to the prototype engine like it was a final exam, not a multi-million-dollar machine that no engineer had dared to touch since the malfunction. Every eye in the room was on her, some skeptical, some mocking, and some even pitying the young woman in a worn hoodie and dust-covered shop shoes. "You have exactly 3 minutes," Douglas said coldly, "unless you plan to burn the whole plant down." Ava didn't respond. She knelt beside the engine and opened the side control panel. Her hands moved fast, precise, like someone who had lived with machines since infancy. Behind her, Ralph stood silent, his weathered hands clenched tight like he was praying. "This model," Ava muttered to herself, just loud enough to hear, "reuses the X2 chassis, but the sensors are from the Z-Mod line. The ground line offsets by 0.8 unless you use a triple-pin microswitch." She gently unhooked a cluster of wires from the board and rerouted them through a small auxiliary chip at the base of the engine. 2 young engineers nearby froze. One of them whispered, "No way! I never even thought about that auxiliary pin." 1 minute passed, then 2. Ava closed the panel, wiped her hands with a tissue, and turned to Douglas. "I isolated the circuit module from the auxiliary sensor frame. Try it again now." Douglas said nothing, just gave a nod. One of the engineers stepped forward and pressed the ignition button. The engine jolted once, then settled into a steady, powerful hum. No more smoke, no more vibrations. The room went completely silent, then erupted into applause and gasps. Some clapped, others just stood there, stunned. Ralph was on the verge of tears. Douglas's face remained stoic, but his eyes had changed. Not because the engine worked, but because of what Ava had said. Something only someone who had seen top-secret schematics would know. "How did you know about the triple-pin microcircuit?" he asked, eyes narrowing. Ava shrugged. "I read every Orion patent filed over the past 3 years. The Z-Mod line isn't public yet, but its logic design mirrors the military-grade M7 platform. I figured the core was borrowed." A nearby engineer whispered, "No one on my team even came close to that." Douglas tightened his jaw. "You just saved a $200 million project. If you weren't Ralph's daughter, I'd think the CIA planted you." The room burst into laughter, but Ava didn't smile. She stood there, calm. "I don't need $200 million. I need you to keep your word." Douglas looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod. "From this moment on, Ava Jefferson, you have full clearance to Orion's technical center. And, as of today, you're a senior technical advisor." No one could find the words. But in that moment, Ava stepped out from the shadow of the janitor's broom and into a world where she'd have to prove herself self-worthy, not just with talent, but with courage. After her promotion, Ava thought things would get easier. But she quickly realized Douglas had no intention of giving her a break. He invited her into his private office, his gaze still ice cold, his tone edged with challenge. "You pulled that off, fine. But Orion isn't a place for playing janitor's daughter makes good. I need to see that wasn't just a lucky break." Ava didn't flinch. She fired back calmly. "What do you want me to prove? I fixed the engine, not by luck, but by knowledge and experience. If you think I'm not qualified, then give me a real challenge." Douglas gave a thin smile. "A challenge? Good. Listen up. We're set to run trials on the upgraded Z-Mod engine in 2 weeks. I want you to lead the technical team and make sure everything runs flawlessly. If anything goes wrong, it's not just the project that dies. Your career does too." No one had ever been handed such responsibility by Douglas, especially not a young woman with no industry credentials. Ava met his eyes, sensing the guardedness behind his stare. "I accept, but I have one condition. All project information must be fully transparent to me. I don't work in the dark." Douglas stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Fine, you'll have access to everything. But remember, one wrong move and you disappear from this place." This wasn't just a test of technical skill. It was a battle for power and respect. Douglas wanted to maintain his absolute authority, while Ava was determined to break through the walls of bias holding her back. As Ava walked out of the office, Douglas thought to himself, "This girl, she won't be easy to crush, but I can't let her shake the foundation of Orion." And so the battle between Ava and Douglas began, a high-stakes war of wits in the shadows of a powerful corporation, where every decision could determine the fate of them both. On Ava's first official day as lead engineer for the upgraded Z-Mod engine project, the air at Orion Motors felt thick with tension. In the large conference room, under the cold glow of fluorescent lights, Douglas stood waiting with a half-smile, a smile that read more like a warning. "Welcome to the big leagues, Miss Jefferson," he said, eyes betraying a hint of wariness. "I've heard a few compliments about you from the engineering board, but don't be fooled. Around here, only results matter." Ava responded with a slight nod, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to work, not to prove myself to you or anyone else." Douglas scoffed and turned to the others in the room. "Engineering team, Miss Ava will be your lead for the next 2 weeks. All technical decisions go through her before they come to me." Some engineers frowned, clearly unimpressed with a newbie taking the helm, especially one without years of field experience. But others lingered quietly, watching her with a flicker of curiosity. The meeting kicked off with a detailed plan Ava had prepared in advance. She walked through each testing phase, outlined risk checkpoints, and laid out contingency protocols. Her delivery reflected deep expertise. Every figure, every technical term rolled off her tongue with ease and precision. Douglas sat motionless, his face like ice. He nodded occasionally, but his eyes never left Ava. He was clearly monitoring every detail, unwilling to give her the slightest room to fail. After the meeting, he called Ava into his small office. The door slammed shut behind her, and his voice carried a mix of challenge and warning. "I know you've got talent, but don't think an outsider can walk in and change Orion in just a few weeks." Ava looked him straight in the eye, unflinching. "I'm not here to change all of Orion. I just want this project to succeed. If I'm wrong, I'll take the fall. But if I'm right, I expect you to treat me with the respect of a peer. Douglas replied coldly. Respect? Around here, respect is earned through power and results. Right now, you have neither. It was a clear declaration of war. Ava knew then that she wasn't just up against technical challenges. She was up against Douglas's veiled hostility and the quiet resistance of longtime insiders. But inside her, the fire of determination burned hotter than ever. She had watched her father endure years of being overlooked and dismissed. Now it was her turn to rise, not just for herself, but for people like him, the forgotten ones in the shadows. As she stepped out into the long hallway, half lit with flickering light and creeping darkness, Ava felt something new. The road ahead would be brutal, but for the first time in her life, she felt in control of her fate. And in the days to come, everything at Orion was about to change. A silent battle of wits had begun between the newcomer and the old guard, and each had their own game plan to win. For the first 3 days, Ava barely left the engineering lab. She slept with her head on the desk, ate instant noodles in the corner, and buried herself in circuit diagrams like they were a code that had to be cracked before the world collapsed. But what troubled her most wasn't the Z-Mod engine. It was the growing sense that something was off with the recent technical schematics. The primary cooling assembly is misaligned by 2 units from the diagnostic measurements. If we install it according to the diagram, the engine will blow under pressure from a reverse heat reaction, she told Ryan, a young engineer who had just joined the team. That's impossible, Ryan frowned. I submitted that file myself. I copied it straight from the central library, followed the system instructions exactly. Ava immediately pulled up the system access logs. There it was, an update timestamped at 2 a.m. the previous night, labeled as an edit made by Ryan. But Ryan swore he didn't do it. Ava didn't say a word. She knew someone was setting her up, and it had to be someone with higher clearance than her. Douglas, a trap, one misstep. If Ava signed off on the faulty design, the entire system would collapse, and she, the brand new mechanical prodigy, would take the fall. Ava didn't confront it head on. Quietly, she traced the system's access logs. At 3 a.m. the next day, an anonymous IP address accessed the engine blueprint folder. The trail was encrypted too well for an ordinary employee. She began to understand. Douglas didn't need to fire her. He just needed her to trip on her own. That morning, Ava walked into the full design team meeting carrying 2 blueprints. One was the official updated version, the other the restored version she had recovered from the old source code. Which one will we choose? She asked calmly, displaying both on the screen. A senior engineer studied them carefully. Wait, this one has an error in the auxiliary shutoff valve. If used, the actuator will explode slowly. Exactly, Ava said, eyes fixed on Douglas. I just want everyone to see that even Orion's own storage system can be tampered with, and we have to be vigilant about threats from within. Douglas smiled. He stood, clapped slowly 3 times. You're very smart, very talented. But the smarter you are, the more you need to remember. Here, survival depends not only on engineering, but also on politics. Ava said nothing. But inside, she knew one thing for sure. This game was far bigger than chips and motors. And there was no turning back. Since that meeting, Ava clearly felt one thing. She was no longer an outsider. She was still watched with cautious eyes. But this time, it was curiosity, not contempt. A few young engineers began tentatively asking her about circuit faults, testing logic, and how to read blueprints in non-traditional ways. Ryan was the first to join. Then Min, the Vietnamese engineer specializing in composite materials. Then Alonzo, the maintenance technician who'd been excluded from every serious project simply because he didn't have a formal degree. They were the unheard, those not sitting in the front rows, but with hands familiar with the real smell of burning wires. They formed a nameless group, working after hours, eating cold sandwiches and drinking cheap coffee. But gradually, they understood each other down to every glance. Ava never gave orders. She asked questions, suggested ideas. Led like a teammate, not a boss. One evening, as the group was studying the new compressor design for the Z-Mod engine system, Ryan whispered, "Do you know why Orion won't let engineers see the full design?" Ava nodded. "Afraid of leaks." Ryan sneered. "True, but I just found some circuits encrypted in a really strange way, like someone's hiding a patented technology." Min tapped lightly on her laptop. That technology doesn't seem to belong to Orion. The room fell silent. Ava sat up straight. A budding suspicion formed in her mind. If true, Douglas wasn't just playing her. He was using Orion to develop unapproved military technology. She couldn't be certain. But if they could find the original file, the birth certificate of the Z-Mod core model, everything might become clear. "We need to get into the original document vault," Ava said, her eyes flashing with an old spark, just like someone who's walked through loss to live with a clear purpose. "You're crazy," Alonzo swallowed hard. "That vault's guarded 24/7. Only level 3 clearance can get in." Ava smirked. "Good. I was just granted senior advisor clearance by Douglas. That means level 3. And I intend to use it before he changes his mind." They exchanged looks. In the dim light of the engineering room, no one smiled. But everyone knew. The game was no longer about fixing an engine. They were starting to dismantle a bigger machine, one far more dangerous. And no one was sure if, when that machine exploded, they'd still have a way back. Douglas Price wasn't the type of CEO blindly obsessed with power. He was obsessed with control. And he could feel it clearly. Control was starting to crack right at the heart of Orion's engineering center. From the name he once dismissed as an impressive joke, Ava Jefferson. A kid who discovered a flaw in the prototype engine, earned the trust of the young engineering team, and now had access to the top-secret data layer. Douglas had seen enough in his lifetime to know, if left unchecked, sprouts like Ava would become a disaster. He didn't call Ava into a meeting. He did the opposite. He organized a ceremony to honor her. On Friday afternoon, the entire engineering division was invited to the main auditorium, a place reserved only for special occasions like anniversaries or major investor visits. "Engineer Ava Jefferson," he said into the microphone, with a smile that would move even outsiders, a living proof that talent isn't about degrees or titles. The one who helped save the Z-Mod project, she deserves special recognition from the board of directors. Ava, standing on the podium, knew this wasn't an honor. It was a spotlight shining straight on her, so everyone could see. She was the exception, not the rule. Douglas handed her an honorary plaque, then shifted tone. "I also want to announce that starting next week, Ava will join the core dev team, Orion's elite research group, but due to the sensitive nature, all her activities in this team will be under special surveillance." Ava clenched her fist slightly, a sophisticated trap. Douglas didn't forbid her. He let her step forward so he could bind her with dozens of invisible strings, confidentiality agreements, data controls, access routing. And worst of all, she would have to leave the young engineers group, the only people not afraid of Douglas. When the ceremony ended, Ava walked off the stage. No one stopped her. But when she reached the engineering area, her access card was disabled at the old door. A security guard said, "You've been reassigned. From now on, you work in Lab 9, East Side Door, Lab 9, where she had no teammates. No one to trust. Douglas didn't need to threaten. All he needed was a transfer order and a tactical smile. Lab 9 was cold and silent, like a secret underground vault. Gone were the soft laughs of the young engineers, the burnt coffee smell during breaks. Only Ava remained, surrounded by rows of servers humming quietly like whispers of chips keeping lies locked inside. Ava didn't waste a second. She knew Douglas had played a ruthless game of chess, but in it, he had no choice but to grant her access to Orion's core system. And she planned to use every millisecond. She started by examining the base code of the Z-Mod engine operating system. The first strange thing that caught her eye: some code segments didn't match any known designs, not even the internal documents she had read. Those segments were flagged as developed by a third party. Orion had always prided itself on being fully independent, especially in foundational technology. A third party? Impossible. She traced the code's origin, and after 3 fingerprint authentications, a folder appeared. Project Helix X9 /authorized D. Price. Ava frowned. The first file inside was a technical cooperation contract, electronically signed by Douglas Price, and a strange name, NovaCore Systems, Defense Branch. She'd never heard of it, but the appendix revealed NovaCore was a subsidiary of a defense corporation specializing in autonomous weaponry. A cold shiver ran down Ava's spine. Orion didn't make weapons. They made electric vehicles. That was why they were funded by green development funds, governments, and nonprofits. If there was proof Orion was mixing defense technology into civilian products, it could cause the entire company to lose funding or even face a federal investigation. Before Ava could open the next file, the screen went black. A dialog box appeared. Invalid access. Session has been logged. System will log out in 10 seconds. She jumped up, heart racing. She had just touched the crack in an iceberg, and Douglas was the one sitting on top of it. Not knowing what to do next, Ava quickly recorded the file name and access code. She couldn't trust anyone right now. But she knew one thing. If Project Helix X9 existed, it wasn't just a threat to Orion's reputation. It was a threat to anyone's life who dared dig deeper. She whispered in the darkness, "What are you hiding in here, Douglas?" The answer, she knew, wouldn't come easily. But Ava was no longer the underestimated girl of Family Day. Now, she was the only one who knew the secret that could bring down the entire Orion empire. Ava couldn't sleep for 2 nights straight. Her mind kept replaying the lines of code from Project Helix X9, not because of their complexity, but because of the consequences if it was all true. She needed to verify it. But she couldn't do it alone. On Saturday, at a small cafe near the old engineering district, Ava met Wyatt again, an engineer mysteriously fired by Douglas last year, just weeks before the Z-Mod prototype was unveiled. Wyatt was the only one who ever designed Orion's core processing board, and he had suspected something shady in the final upgrade before being accused of leaking documents and getting fired. When I asked about the X9 module, Wyatt said, his eyes darkening, Douglas said it was next-gen temperature sensor tech, but that chip doesn't have any thermal control circuits. It's a command chip for remote target tracking. Ava gripped her coffee cup tighter. And if it's installed in civilian cars? We're driving around mobile bombs that can be remotely controlled, Wyatt growled. They're not designed to run. They're designed to hunt. Ava fell silent. It wasn't that she hadn't heard rumors about dual-use technology before, but this wasn't speculation. She had seen the code. Wyatt had designed it. And if they found out that chip was actually installed en masse in Orion cars, the scandal could shake the entire country. The following week, Ava secretly opened a new Orion vehicle at the test drive area, under the pretense of a routine technical check. She removed the dashboard panel, and her heart sank when she spotted the tiny chip, faintly stamped with X9 NVC Core. She said nothing to anyone, only sent an encrypted report to the FBI, along with a copy of the entire Helix X9 folder, IP addresses, and Douglas Price's digital signature. 3 days later, the raid happened at Orion Motors. Ava stood silently on the engineering floor balcony as agents marched Douglas between 2 rows of stunned engineers and staff. He was still dressed in a sharp suit, but his face was now cold as molten steel. As he passed Ava, he paused for a moment. "You really don't understand what you've done," he said. Ava replied without blinking. "I understand more than you think. And this time, you can't erase data, replace people, or cover it up with a new model. This time, it's the truth you have to face." Douglas said nothing, only clenched his jaw slightly and walked away. That day, for the first time in years, Ralph stood tall in the factory, looking up at his daughter like 3 months after Douglas Price's arrest. Orion Motors had changed so much that even longtime employees barely recognized the place they once worked. The sleek glass office where Douglas once sat was now an open space, where engineers, from rookies to veterans, gathered around a massive table to collaborate on designs. Whiteboards crowded with technical diagrams, handwritten notes, and even Ava Jefferson's neat handwriting covered the walls. Yes, now she was the chief engineering officer, or as everyone affectionately called her simply, Ava. She declined the CEO chair. "I wasn't born to wear a suit and sit through meetings," she laughed. "I want to see grease on my hands and my eyes red from wiring strain, not from reading financial reports." Instead, the Orion board, with mostly new members, gave her full authority over engineering and product ethics. An independent oversight committee was also established, including representatives from the government, research institutes, and even Ralph Jefferson, the man who once was only handed a broom and a gray uniform. Ralph was now the cultural advisor for human resources. But he still kept his habit of walking around the workshop every morning, greeting everyone like old friends. "Watch out for the third gear. It tends to slip if the temperature rises above 70, he'd remind them, and everyone would nod with quiet respect. Ava hadn't changed much. Still in her worn hoodie and dusty work boots, but her eyes shone differently now. She no longer had to prove anything. She had done it, not just presenting a new design, but rebuilding a company that seemed to have fallen into the abyss of greed and manipulation. The new model, Orion Reclaim, was unveiled at a simple ceremony. No fireworks, no red carpet. Just engineers, workers, and a small group of students Ava invited from her old high school, where she had once been the quiet kid who liked to take bikes apart during recess. When reporters asked why there wasn't a big marketing campaign, Ava just smiled. "We don't want to sell cars. We want to rebuild trust." That night, Ava stood alone in the workshop. No one else was around, only the soft echo of metal and the glow of fluorescent lights. Ralph stepped forward and handed her an old wooden box. Inside was his very first design, a mini engine powered by earthquake energy he had dreamed of developing back in 1987. "You can improve it," he said quietly, "or leave it as is. But remember, every great thing starts from the smallest." Ava hugged the blueprints to her chest and nodded. In the darkness, a new Orion was waiting to be built. And this time, it wouldn't be controlled by shady orders, but by intelligence, integrity, and trust.